You said that you're going to be here until the governor gives you an audience.
I would love for the governor to come holler at you, girl.
A few moments later.
State Representative Angie Nixon arrested after staging a sit-in for hours outside of Governor Ron DeSantis' office.
When was the last time a politician getting arrested on the news actually changed your life? Not change the news cycle, change your actual life, your rent, your kids' school, your neighborhood. I'm going to guess the answer is never. And that's exactly what we need to talk about today, because there's a real difference between fighting for your people and fighting for the cameras. Because, and right now, Florida State Representative Angie Nixon just gave us a very clear, very public example of what that difference looks like in practice. She staged a sit-in outside of Governor Ron DeSantis' office over Florida's redistricting maps, got warned to leave, stayed anyway, and got arrested. And the whole thing was on camera. And today we're going to break down three things: what redistricting actually is in plain English, what actually happened with Nixon step by step, and what real political accountability looks like when someone is actually trying to win for their community instead of win the news cycle. So let's get into it. I want you guys to see in regards of her shouting with a bullhorn in regards of the congressional seats and the redistricting of the map in Florida. Within that being said, check it out.
Destroy our democracy. This is a violation of the Constitution. It is. It's a violation of the Constitution. I'm out of order, but y'all are doing illegal.
Representative Persons Mullica has waived closed. The question now recurs on final passage of HB 1D. The clerk will unlock the machine and the members will proceed to vote. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? The clerk will lock the machine and announce the vote.
83 yeas, 28 nays, Mr. Speaker.
Show the bill passes. Read the next bill.
None on the desk, Mr. Speaker.
That was the bill being passed for redistricting the maps.
Jacksonville Democratic State Representative Angie Nixon got a formal reprimand from her colleagues this afternoon. I'm Jake Stofan.
I'm Tanika Hughes. It's for her protest on the House floor during last month's vote to pass new congressional maps.
Now, I spoke with Representative Nixon before the hearing today, and she says she has no regrets.
I believe a reprimand is both appropriate and necessary. No one should take pleasure in reprimanding a fellow member.
Those were the words of Fleming Island State Representative Sam Garrison before the House Committee on Rules and Ethics issued a formal reprimand against Jacksonville State Representative Angie Nixon. Garrison chairs that committee. The punishment resulted from Nixon's protest on the House floor last month ahead of a vote on new congressional maps. We spoke with Nixon ahead of the hearing. Do you have any regrets about the way that you went about the protest on the floor?
Jake, I don't have any regrets about what I did.
Nixon says she was blindsided by the punishment, saying she was never informed ahead of the hearing and was not offered a chance to speak during it.
They don't want us to have a say. They don't want us to use our voice. And it's just a slap in the face, and it goes against democracy.
Garrison noted in the vast majority of cases, members who violate House rules are not punished. But in this case, where the disruption caused two members to vote incorrectly and another to seek medical attention for hearing damage, he felt it was necessary.
I don't think members like to do this because at the end of the day, they have to operate in the same chamber as with their colleagues. So it is fairly rare.
JU political science professor Dr. Matthew Corrigan says the punishment might actually work to Nixon's advantage as she's leaving the House later this year to run for U.S. Senate.
Because Democrats want to fight right now. They want to take on Republicans.
Nixon violates House rules again. Prior to her exit from the legislature, she was warned she could face more severe consequences, ranging from a formal censure to removal from office.
Redistricting sounds like a government word designed to make your eyes glaze over. It's not complicated. Every 10 years after the census counts how many people live where, states redraw the boundaries of their voting districts. Think of it like redrawing the lines of a neighborhood. You're deciding which streets belong to which area, and that determines who your local representative is, what issues they're expected to fight for, and how much political weight your community carries. Why does that matter to you personally? Because your district determines your representation in Congress. It affects which schools get what funding, which communities get infrastructure investment, and which neighborhoods get prioritized in local budgets. The lines on that map are not just political, they are practical. They connect directly to the quality of life in your zip code. Now, here's where the legal background matters. In 2023, the Supreme Court ruled in a case called Allen v. Milligan that race-based redistricting can be required under the Voting Rights Act in certain situations. But separately, courts have also made clear over the years that states cannot draw districts purely based on race as a dominant factor. The legal standard is genuinely complicated, and reasonable legal minds disagree about where the line is. That's important context because Florida's new congressional maps sit right in the middle of that debate. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed to fix a specific documented problem. Black Americans in the South were being systemically blocked from political participation through poll taxes, literacy tests, and outright intimidation. The law was designed to make sure that communities who had been deliberately shut out could finally have real representation, being able to vote. That was the intent, and it mattered enormously. What's happened since then is that the legal landscape has shifted. Courts have wrestled for decades with the difference between drawing a district to protect minority voting power versus drawing a district where race is the primary factor over everything else. Those two things sound similar, but they are treated very differently under the law. Now, in gerrymandering, the practice of drawing maps to benefit one party is a real problem. Both parties have done it. Republicans have done it. Democrats have done it. That is not a conspiracy theory. It is a documented history. But gerrymandering has also become one of the most effective fundraising talking points in politics because it's easy to make people angry about it without ever having to prove anything or win anything in court. And that's the key point right here. If you genuinely believe a map is unconstitutional, the system already gives you a path. You challenge it in court. You build your legal argument, you file, and you fight it through the judicial process. That is how civil rights organizations have won their most durable victories in American history. The process exists specifically for moments like this one. So now you understand what's actually being fought over. The question is how we got from a legal dispute to a sitting lawmaker getting arrested in a government hallway.
Hey y'all, it's United States Senate candidate and Florida State Representative Angie Nixon here. Earlier today, I was formally reprimanded in the Ethics and Rules Committee in the Florida House because I disrupted proceedings that were unconstitutionally and illegally drawing maps that gerrymandered in such a way that caused some folks to lose their representation. Folks are asking me what I would do, whether I would do it again. And I would say, when it comes to speaking up for people and making sure that they have access to vote for who they want to vote for and their voting rights, I would absolutely do it again. But this time I would do it with a brighter pink and bigger megaphone. Look, y'all, we're boldly being attacked, and this moment calls for bold leadership. Donate at angienixon.com. Send me to Washington, D.C. so that we can change the trajectory of our country.
You said that you're going to be here until the governor gives you an audience.
I would love for the governor to come holler at you, girl. I mean, I'm a sitting lawmaker just like him. I was elected just like him. And we need to have a conversation about why he continues to rig maps, why he continues to play political games, why he is not looking out for Floridians. We need to have that conversation.
What would you tell him?
What I would tell him is that he needs to call another special session to unrig the maps and do what the voters voted for back in 2010, which is fair districts.
You're a lawmaker, so you have special rights and privileges to be inside this building, I think probably after hours. What do you think happens next here when...
I don't know. I'm not supposed to be in the governor's office after hours, I don't think. So we'll see what happens. But I'm going to be here. I don't know for how long, but it's going to be a while. I'm not giving up easily. You know, I just really want, I want them to change what they're doing.
You said that...
So you seen that, you heard that. And let's walk through exactly what happened in order, because the sequence here matters more than any single moment in isolation. Florida's Republican-controlled legislature passed new congressional maps. Democrats opposed them. That's normal. Redistricting fights happen in every cycle in every state. But Representative Angie Nixon, as you've been seeing her behavior through the clips I've been showing you guys in regards of her behavior and the pattern of behavior and how she's doubling down and actually feeling justified in regards to her behavior and how she would double down and do it even more with a bigger pink megaphone or bullhorn. So, and asking people to donate. So, when you look at that, she didn't file a legal challenge or coordinate with civil rights organizations to prepare a court case. She walked onto the House floor during the vote with a bullhorn and started shouting that the process was unconstitutional and destroying democracy. The disruption was loud enough that two other members voted incorrectly on the bill that you guys heard in the news clip, and one member sought medical attention for hearing damage. That's not a minor procedural hiccup. That's a lawmaker's protest physically affecting the ability of other elected officials to do their jobs. The House Committee on Rules and Ethics issued her a formal reprimand for it. Her response, when asked if she had any regrets, as you know, she said no, she'll do it again and with a bigger megaphone next time. She also was put on notice, clearly and on the record, that any further violations of House rules could result in a former removal from office. The very next day, she staged the sit-in that I just showed you guys outside Governor DeSantis' office. Now, here's a detail worth paying attention to, because the reporter asked her directly as she was sitting there that I showed you guys, you have special privileges as a lawmaker to be inside this building, but you're probably not supposed to be in the governor's office after hours, right? Her answer was, I'm not paraphrasing here, I don't know, I'm not supposed to be in the governor's office after hours, I don't think, quote unquote. She said that on camera. She knew she probably wasn't supposed to be there. She stayed anyway. A building official came and gave the group one clear warning. The building is closed. 9 employees must exit, and this is your only warning.
All right, I want to get to where everyone can hear me. Building is closed as of now. If you are not a state employee, you must exit the building at this time. This area is also closed to state employees, unless you are in the governor's office themselves. So this is your one warning you will get right now. You will be trespassed and arrested after trespass. Do we understand?
No, so you said
this includes press, because press badges do not get you into the Capitol when it's closed.
So you said, what about the governor's office? We can't be here?
No, you cannot. This is all closed. The building's closed. No one's allowed in the building right now. It's a closed building.
Even if I'm a lawmaker?
You cannot be in here. You can be out there. You can't be in here.
I'll wait on the governor.
Okay. All right.
You good?
And there you have it, right? So Nixon did not leave, right? And you guys can see that she stayed back there. After being given one clear warning that the building is closed, 9 employees must exit. That is your only warning. She was arrested with 2 other protesters.
State Representative Angie Nixon arrested after staging a sit-in for hours outside of Governor Ron DeSantis' office. Thank you for joining us for First Coast News at 6. I'm Heather Crawford.
And I'm Jeannie Blaylock. We have brand new video posted on Nixon's social media account showing the sit-in. News Service Florida is reporting the protest began about noon. The representative's goal was to speak with the governor about affordability in Florida. 2 other protesters were also arrested a short time ago.
So this comes one day after Nixon was reprimanded for anti-redistricting protesting inside the Florida House chambers. Right now, we are working to learn what charges she's facing and if she's still in custody. We have reached out to her and her team. We've not yet heard back, but Nixon is also running currently for U.S. Senate.
I find it very interesting because she clearly said out loud that basically they need to get rid of the unrigged redistricting maps, the new maps in regards to the redistricting maps. But as you heard this reporter say, they were having a sit-in in the guise of affordability. So which one is it? Because Miss Nixon, she's outright saying it outlandishly. Look, we need to talk, because he need to holler at me, quote unquote. I'm professional, but he need to holler at me because these maps are rigged and he need to unrig them. That's what she said, you guys. We went through that and you guys seen that clearly. And she was arrested along with two other protesters. And then immediately after the reprimand the day before the sit-in even happened, she posted a fundraising video that I showed you guys. Protest footage as the pitch. Donate to her website, Senator Washington. The reprimand she called a slap in the face because a campaign asset within hours. I mean, the reprimand she called a slap in the face became a campaign asset within hours. Think about that sequence. Protests, consequences, ignore the consequences, more protests, arrest, fundraise off of all of it. There's a life lesson that applies here that most of us learned pretty early. When someone in authority tells you there will be consequences and you ignore that warning, what happens next is not something that was done to you. It's something you chose. The warning was given, the choice was made, the outcome was predictable from the moment she decided to stay in that hallway. And the question we're sitting with now isn't just what she did, it's who this whole sequence actually served. And as you guys can read, it says now Governor Ron DeSantis just had Representative Angie Nixon arrested after she did an illegal sit-in at his office because of the 2026 Florida House map that adds 4+ Republican seats. She melted down. And DeSantis plays no games. And as you guys can see here, in regards of the video clip, with all of her actions, and the sequence that I just broke down to you guys as we're just having a conversation about.
Representative Persons Mullica has waived closed. The question now recurs on final passage of HB 1D.
To have that conversation.
So then it says reprimanded and now arrested. There you have it. Let's define two things now, having a conversation. Clearly, because the difference between them is the whole point of this conversation. Performative politics is designed to generate attention. Clearly. Productive politics is designed to generate results. Those two things can look identical from the outside. Both involve passion, both involve showing up, both involve raising your voice. The difference is in what they're actually built to produce. One is built to move the crowd. The other is built to move the needle. Most of us have seen this playbook at work. You had that coworker or maybe that manager who calls a big meeting every time something goes wrong. They get loud, they get emotional, they lay out every reason why the problem is somebody else's fault, and then the meeting ends. The report never gets filed, the process never gets followed. The problem is still there next week and the week after that, but that person, they feel like they did something. They feel like they fought, and everyone around them knows the truth, and they wanted to be seen fighting more than they wanted to fix the problem or the problem fixed. That pattern shows up in politics too, and it's important to understand why it works as a short-term strategy, even when it fails as a long-term one. Now, before we go further, let's give credit where credit is due, because the sit-in as a protest tradition has genuinely a powerful history in this country. The civil rights movement sit-ins of the 1960s, Woolworth's lunch counter in Greensboro, the Nashville sit-ins, those weren't random disruptions. They were precise. They targeted a specific legally enforced injustice that courts and legislators had already reviewed and upheld. They had the moral clarity of opposing something that had a huge portion of the country already knew was wrong, even if the law hadn't caught up yet. They were organized. They had legal teams ready. They had defined demands. And critically, the people conducting them understood that the goal was to change the law, not just to change the news cycle. The context matters here because what happened in Tallahassee, I think I'm saying it right, was constructionally different. Nixon wasn't protesting a law that had been challenged in court and upheld anyway. She was disrupting a legislative process before any court had even reviewed the maps. She called the redistricting unconstitutional, and it may well turn out to be a legitimate legal argument, but no court had ruled on it yet. That makes it a theory, not a legal finding. And you don't break the law, ignore warnings, and get yourself arrested based on the theory. You take that theory to court, which is exactly what the third branch of government exists for. Our system has three branches deliberately. The legislator passes laws. The courts decide if those laws held up under the Constitution. We already know the Supreme Court take on this. That's why she's just screaming and shouting and losing her mind, because the reality is she knows there's no reason to fight it in court, so it becomes off more performative, right? The executive enforces them, right, when it comes to the laws. And when you disrupt the legislative process before the courts had even had a chance to weigh in, you haven't skipped a step out of urgency. You skipped a step out of impatience. Impatience dressed up as courage is still just impatience, or just nagging and crying and whining, boohoo, whining and crying because and having a temper tantrum, being a grown adult who's supposed to be a public official acting in a way because they didn't get their way. So ask yourself the fair question here, the one that cuts through the politics completely. If a Republican lawmaker had walked into a Democratic governor's office after hours, has been told to leave, refused, and gotten arrested, would that be framed as brave protest or dangerous overreach? You already know the answer. And when you already know the answer, that tells you the framing matters more to people than the principle. Let the standard be consistently upheld on both ends. I don't care which party you represent or you rock with, Republican or Democrat. When the framing matters more than the principle, you're not watching politics anymore. You're watching a performance. And let's reframe this conversation entirely, because so far we've been talking about what Nixon did and why it didn't make legal sense. But there's a more important question sitting underneath all of that, one that rarely gets asked when these moments go viral. The people of Jacksonville sent her to Tallahassee to represent them, not to represent herself, not to build a Senate campaign, to represent them. So what did they actually get out of this? Jacksonville's district, like most urban districts in Florida, has real ground level problems that don't get solved by a sit-in. Housing affordability is a genuine pressure. Rents have climbed, home ownership is harder to reach, and working families are getting squeezed. Public safety is a real conversation in the community. Economic opportunity, job access, small business support. These are all things constituents actually call their representatives about. None of these issues move 1 inch forward because of what happened outside the governor's office. Not one policy change, not one family situation improved. The cameras left, and the problem stayed exactly where they were. There's something else that gets damaged here that's harder to measure, but matters just as much. Trust. Communities that have been historically underserved by political institutions are often the most motivated to organize, to vote, to push for change. That motivation is genuinely powerful, but it runs on trust. When a politician takes that community energy, that frustration, that real anger about real issues, and converts it into a fundraising email before the news cycle even ends, something breaks. People start to wonder whether the fight was ever really about them. And history gives us a clear blueprint for what actually works. The labor movement didn't work. The labor movement didn't win the 40-hour work week by disrupting government buildings. They organized, they struck strategically, and they built coalitions across industries, and they pushed legislation through years of sustained effort. Women's suffrage wasn't won in a single dramatic moment. It was 72 years of organizing, lobbying, legal challenges, and coalition building across state lines. The Civil Rights Act didn't pass because people were loud in hallways. It passed because organizations like the NAACP spent decades building legal cases. Now, currently, where the NCAACP is from when it was back then, that's a whole different conversation, because we know it's entirely in change for the better. I don't know, questionable. But training community leaders and connecting local grievances to national legislation. That was the whole purpose early on, back then, of the NAACP. Every single one of those movements combined protest with strategy, is my point. Visibility with process, emotion with organization. Remove the strategy and you don't have a movement. You have a movement. Movements trend. Movements change law. The pattern we're talking about, generating outrage, collecting donations, gaining name recognition without producing any actual policy wins, isn't new, and it isn't unique to one party or one politician. It's a business model. And the people paying the price for that business model are the ones who sent her there in the first place. To be completely fair, redistricting is worth fighting if those maps genuinely dilute minority voting power in a way that violates the law. That is a serious concern and deserves a serious response. The cause isn't the problem. The method is. And the difference between those two things is exactly what her constituents deserved someone to understand before the bullhorn came out. So if a sit-in doesn't work, what does? Because at the end of the day, I deserve to, put it like this. As an American taxpayer, I deserve to know that my representative, just like we all do as American taxpayers, on actually seeing results for someone that we trusted. Now, I owe to you guys, and you guys deserve more than a breakdown of what went wrong. You actually deserve an actual answer. And I say that as all of us and you watching this together, family, as we are American taxpayers, and what we are owed from our representatives. The legal process for challenging a redistricting map is not complicated to understand. Even if it takes time to execute, you file a lawsuit, you present your argument to court. If you lose, you appeal. If the evidence supports your claim, courts have ruled against redistricting maps before, and those rulings actually stick. They produce real, durable change because they go through the branch of government that has the authority to enforce them. That's not a loophole, that's the design. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund is the clearest historic example of this working at scale. For decades before the Civil Rights Act passed, before school desegregation was law, before voting protections existed on paper, the LDF, the Legal Defense Fund, was in courtrooms building cases. Thurgood Marshall and his team didn't storm government buildings. They out-argued the opposition in front of judges. Brown versus the Board of Education didn't happen because someone grabbed a megaphone. It happened because lawmakers spent years constructing an airtight legal case that the Supreme Court couldn't dismiss. That strategy produced a ruling that changed the entire country. A sitting in a hallway has never done that. Now, what can regular people actually do more than most realize? Local redistricting hearings are open to the public, and public comment is part of the official record, meaning your voice on the record can be cited in legal challenges later. Contacting your state representatives directly, consistently in an organized numbers changes their calculations. I'm gonna say it again. Contacting your state representative directly, consistently, and in organized numbers changes their calculations. Supporting organizations that are actively litigating these maps in the court. The ACLU, right? The ACLU, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, state level voting rights groups put resources where they can legally compel change. But like I said, as we already know where things stand, because the maps are already legally justified, so all she's doing is just being an agent of chaos, which we're seeing now. But I just like making, instead of just entertaining the rage and the negativity, I like to offer a solution for you guys within your local legislators to make an example out of this on what we, the taxpayer, can do right and what the conduct of the representative should be, which is my whole point of doing this video. Because we can doom and gloom all day and talk about her and get personal attacks, but we're not going to do none of that. I like to break it down and give you guys a real solution positively out of all of this, because that's what matters, right? People can doom and gloom and clickbait all day long, but this is not what I like to do. I like to actually give some value so you guys can show, understand, but also show, look, I understand now. And I know how to be involved, and I know how to hold my representative accountable. So all of it requires showing up, right? The whole thing with organizations that support what you are standing on as a, taxpayer and as a local, right? Because you can be involved. And the whole point is regular people going to the redistricting hearings, having organizations that stand for what you're standing for and you want change in your communities. And basically with those resources that legally challenge and compel, that legally can challenge things and make a change for what you want to change in your neighborhoods and communities. None of that requires a camera crew. It just requires showing up. The First Amendment is real and it matters. You have a right to protest, to speak, to organize, to make noise outside government buildings and in public spaces responsibly. That right is worth protecting. But the First Amendment has never protected trespassing in a closed government building after hours. Not for any citizen, not for any elected official. Your title doesn't change the rules of the space you're standing in. She knew that. She said so on camera. That's the part that separates this from a principled stand. The broader point applies across the aisle, and it needs to be said plainly. When any politician, Republican, Democrat, Independent, whoever, chooses theater over process, the people they represent absorb the cost. The politician gets the footage, the fundraising bump, the name recognition, the constituent gets nothing changed. Holding politicians accountable isn't just about consequences when they break rules. It's voters deciding clearly and consistently that viral moments don't count as results. That the standard for your representative is whether your community is actually better off, not whether they trended on Tuesday on social media. You don't need a bullhorn to have political power. You need to understand how the system works, show up to the unglamorous parts, the hearings, the meetings, the phone calls, and hold every elected official to the exact same standard regardless of which team they play for. The consistency is where the actual leverage lives. And here's what this whole situation has come down to. A cause can be completely legitimate and the method can still be completely wrong. And when the method is wrong, it's not the politician who pays the price, it's the community that sent them there. Redistricting is worth fighting. Voting rights are worth fighting, but the fight has to be built to win, not built to trend. Learn the process, use the process, and demand that the people you elect use it too. That's how you actually move the needle. Drop a comment. Do you think this kind of protest actually helps the community these politicians represent, or does it help them? I want to hear what you think. And if this breakdown gave you something to think about, subscribe, because we do this kind of thing every day. Spread that peace, love, and positivity. Let the love supersede the hate. Catch you in the next one, family. On that note, peace.